This is my true story. I found my wife's wedding ring at the bottom of the lake where she said she lost it 3 years ago. She had been devastated when it slipped off her finger during our anniversary trip, and we searched for hours but never found it. Last week I went back to scatter my mother's ashes and decided to dive one more time. When I found the ring, I rushed home so excited to surprise her. But when I showed it to her, she turned completely pale and ran out of the house without saying a word. When she finally came back, she confessed everything, and the ring revealed a secret that destroyed our marriage. Before I tell you what happened, tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. Every summer for 15 years, my wife and I returned to the same lake where I had proposed to her decades earlier. It was our tradition and our sacred ritual that we never missed, no matter how busy our lives got or what else was happening. We would rent the same cabin on the North Shore and spend a long weekend, just the two of us, away from work and responsibilities and the stress of daily life. The lake was about 2 hours from our home, and it was beautiful and peaceful with clear water and pine trees surrounding it on all sides. I had proposed to her at that lake when we were both young and just starting our lives together. We had taken a boat out at sunset, and I got down on one knee in the middle of the water and asked her to marry me. She said yes immediately and cried happy tears, and I slipped the ring on her finger right there in the boat while the sun was setting behind the mountains. It was the most perfect moment of my life, and we both agreed we would come back to that spot every year to remember and celebrate. We kept that promise faithfully for 15 years. Every anniversary we would rent the same cabin and take the same boat out at sunset and sit in the middle of the lake holding hands and talking about our life together. We would reminisce about the proposal and about our wedding and about all the years we had spent building a life together. Those weekends at the lake were sacred to both of us, and they reminded us why we had fallen in love in the first place. My wife cherished her wedding ring more than anything she owned. It was a simple gold band with a small diamond, but to her it represented everything we had built together. She never took it off, not even to shower or sleep or do dishes. She said the ring was her piece of forever, and that as long as she wore it, she carried our love with her everywhere she went. I loved seeing it on her finger because it reminded me that she had chosen me and continued to choose me every day. She would twist the ring on her finger when she was thinking or nervous, and she would look at it and smile when she was happy. When our children were born, she made sure they understood the significance of the ring and what it represented. She told them the story of the proposal at the lake and how their father had promised to love her forever. The ring was not just jewelry to her, it was a symbol of our entire relationship and everything we meant to each other. Those anniversary trips to the lake became even more important as the years went by and life got more complicated. We had jobs and kids and bills and stress, and sometimes we struggled to connect the way we used to when we were young. But those weekends at the lake reminded us of who we were before all the responsibilities piled up. We would talk about our dreams and our fears and our hopes for the future. We would reconnect physically and emotionally and come home feeling renewed and committed to each other. The lake itself became a character in our love story. We knew every part of that shoreline and every trail through the woods around the cabin. We knew which dock had the best view of the sunset and which spot was best for swimming. We had our favorite restaurant in the little town nearby and our favorite ice cream shop we always visited. The place was filled with memories of laughter and intimacy and quiet moments of just being together. I thought those trips meant as much to her as they meant to me. I thought she looked forward to them the way I did, and that she valued that time together as a sacred part of our marriage. I thought the lake represented everything good about our relationship, and that going back there every year was a way of honoring what we had built. I never imagined that one of those trips would become the site of a betrayal so deep it would destroy everything we had. I never imagined the lake that held our best memories would also hold the worst secret of our marriage buried at the bottom, waiting to resurface and reveal the truth. 3 years ago, we took our usual anniversary trip to the lake, and everything seemed normal at first. We arrived on Friday evening and unpacked our things in the cabin and had dinner at our favorite restaurant. Saturday morning, we went for a long walk around the lake and then spent the afternoon relaxing on the dock. My wife seemed a little distant, but I thought she was just tired from work. She had been stressed about a big project at her job, and I figured she was having trouble letting go and relaxing. That evening we took the boat out at sunset like we always did. We rowed to the middle of the lake and sat there watching the sun go down behind the mountains. I told her how much I loved her and how grateful I was for 15 years of marriage. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes, and I noticed she seemed uncomfortable. I asked if everything was okay, and she said she was fine, just tired. We stayed out on the water until it started getting dark, and then we rowed back to shore. The next morning she said she wanted to go swimming before we packed up to leave. The water was cold because it was early in the season, but she insisted. She swam out away from the dock, and I watched from the shore because I had already packed most of our things in the car. She was out there for maybe 20 minutes, and then she came back to shore and started getting dressed. That is when I noticed her ring finger was bare. She stared at her hand in disbelief and then started touching her other fingers, like maybe she had moved the ring to a different finger and forgotten. But it was not there. She looked at me with panic in her eyes and said the ring was gone. She said it must have slipped off while she was swimming because the water was cold and her fingers had shrunk. I immediately asked her where she had been swimming, and she pointed to the area near the old dock about 50 feet from shore. We both ran into the water and started diving down trying to find it. The water was murky and full of weeds, and it was hard to see anything. I dove down over and over until my lungs burned and my body was numb from the cold. She was crying and screaming that we had to find it and that she could not lose her ring. We searched for hours until the sun was setting, and we were both exhausted and freezing. But we found nothing. I told her we would come back the next weekend with diving equipment and search more thoroughly. She said yes, we had to find it because it meant everything to her. We drove home in silence, and she cried the entire way. When we got home, she locked herself in the bathroom and sobbed for what felt like hours. I tried to comfort her, but she would not let me touch her. She said she felt like she had lost a part of herself and that nothing would ever be the same. Over the next few weeks, I hired professional divers to search the lake bottom, where she said she had been swimming. They searched for days using metal detectors and diving gear, but they found nothing. The lake was deep in that area, and the bottom was covered in decades of sediment and debris. The divers said the ring could have been buried in the mud or carried away by currents. They said after a certain point it was hopeless to keep looking. My wife was devastated for months after losing the ring. She wore the absence of it like an open wound. She would stare at her bare finger constantly and twist the skin where the ring used to be. She apologized to me over and over for losing something so precious. She said she felt like she had failed our marriage by losing the symbol of our love. I told her it was just a ring and that our marriage was not defined by a piece of metal. I said we could buy a new ring, but she refused and said it would not be the same. She never wore another ring on that finger. She said nothing could replace the original, and that she would rather wear nothing than wear something that was not the ring I gave her when I proposed. Last week, my mother passed away after a long illness, and her final wish was to have her ashes scattered at the lake where our family used to vacation when I was a child. It happened to be the same lake where I had proposed to my wife all those years ago. I decided to go alone on a quiet weekday morning to honor my mother's wishes and have some private time to grieve and remember her. I packed her ashes in an urn and drove the 2 hours to the lake feeling heavy with loss and memory. I arrived early in the morning when the lake was still and quiet and there was no one else around. I rented a small boat and rowed out to the middle of the lake where the water was deepest. I opened the urn and scattered my mother's ashes across the water and said a prayer and cried for the woman who had raised me and loved me unconditionally. The moment was peaceful and sad, and I felt like I was closing a chapter of my life that could never be reopened. After I finished, I sat in the boat for a long time, just looking at the water and thinking about my mother and my wife and all the years that had passed. I found myself near the old dock where my wife said she had lost her ring 3 years ago. I had not thought about the ring in months because we had both accepted it was gone forever. But sitting there in the boat staring at the water, I felt a sudden urge to try one more time to find it. I knew it was foolish because professional divers had searched that area thoroughly and found nothing. But something inside me said I should try. Maybe it was grief making me want to do something concrete and hopeful. Maybe it was a way to distract myself from the pain of losing my mother. Or maybe it was just one last, desperate attempt to recover something precious that had been lost. I pulled the boat up to the dock and grabbed the diving mask I had brought with me just in case. I dove into the cold water and swam down toward the bottom. The visibility was poor, and the water was darker than I remembered. I could only see a few feet in front of me, and I had to feel my way along the muddy bottom with my hands. I dove down several times, coming up for air each time empty-handed. My lungs were burning and my body was getting cold, but I kept diving because I felt like I had to try just one more time. On my fifth or sixth dive, I swam out toward the deeper water near the old dock pilings. I was about 20 feet down, feeling through the silt and weeds, when my fingers touched something hard and smooth. I grabbed it and pulled it free from the mud, and even in the murky water, I could see it was metal. My heart started racing as I kicked toward the surface, clutching whatever I had found in my fist. I broke through the surface, gasping for air, and immediately opened my hand to see what I was holding. It was a ring, a gold ring with a small diamond covered in mud and algae, but unmistakable. I wiped it clean on my shirt and held it up to the light and recognized it immediately as my wife's wedding ring. The same ring she had lost 3 years ago. The same ring we had searched for with divers and metal detectors. The same ring she had mourned like a death. I could not believe I had actually found it after all this time. I felt a surge of joy and excitement thinking about how happy my wife would be when I showed it to her. I imagined surprising her and seeing her face light up with shock and relief. I imagined her crying tears of joy and slipping the ring back on her finger where it belonged. This discovery felt like a miracle and a gift and a sign that even lost things can sometimes be recovered. I climbed back into the boat and sat there staring at the ring in disbelief. I wrapped it carefully in a cloth and put it in my pocket. I rowed back to shore as fast as I could and drove home going 20 miles over the speed limit because I was so eager to show my wife what I had found. I rushed home trembling with excitement and anticipation, thinking about the moment I would surprise my wife with the ring. The entire drive home I rehearsed what I would say and imagined how she would react. I pictured her crying with happiness and throwing her arms around me and telling me she could not believe I had found it after all this time. I felt like a hero bringing back something precious that had been lost and mourned. I thought this would be one of the best moments of our marriage and a story we would tell for the rest of our lives. I pulled into our driveway and saw her car was there, which meant she was home. I grabbed the ring from my pocket and held it carefully as I walked to the front door. My heart was pounding with excitement and my hands were shaking. I opened the door and saw her in the kitchen making dinner. She looked up when she heard me come in and smiled and asked how the trip to the lake had been. I said it had been sad but meaningful and that I had scattered my mother's ashes like she wanted. Then I could not contain my excitement any longer, and I held up the ring and shouted, "I found it. I found your ring." I walked toward her with my hand outstretched, showing her the gold band with the diamond that I had cleaned up in the car. I said I dove down near the old dock one last time, and there it was buried in the mud, just waiting to be found. I expected her to scream with joy, or burst into tears, or run toward me to take it from my hand. Instead, her entire face drained of all color, and she went completely pale like all the blood had left her body. Her eyes went wide, and she stared at the ring in my palm like it was a snake or a weapon or something terrifying. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her whole body went rigid, and I could see her hands starting to shake. She looked from the ring to my face and back to the ring, and I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen before. It was not joy or relief or happiness. It was pure terror. I asked her what was wrong and why she was not happy. I said I thought she would be thrilled to have her ring back after 3 years of mourning it. I took a step closer to her, holding out the ring and telling her to take it and put it back on where it belonged. But she backed away from me like I was threatening her. She kept staring at the ring, and her breathing was getting faster and more panicked. She whispered, "Where did you find that?" And her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her. I said I found it at the bottom of the lake where you lost it 3 years ago. I said I dove down near the old dock just like you said, and there it was. I said it is a miracle that I found it after all this time and after professional divers could not find it. I held it out to her again and told her to take it. But instead of reaching for it, she backed up further until she hit the counter behind her. She looked at me with eyes full of fear and something else I could not identify. It looked like guilt, or shame, or panic. She said in a whisper that was barely audible, "Where exactly did you find it?" I said, "I already told you I found it at the bottom of the lake near the old dock where you were swimming that day." She shook her head slowly and said, "No, that is not possible." I asked what she meant and why it was not possible. I said the ring was right there in the mud, exactly where it should have been, if it slipped off your finger while you were swimming. She stared at me for another few seconds, and then she suddenly turned and ran toward the front door. I called after her, asking where she was going and what was wrong, but she did not answer. She grabbed her purse and her keys and ran out the door and got in her car. I ran after her, but she was already backing out of the driveway. She drove away without looking at me, and I stood there in the driveway holding the ring, completely confused about what had just happened. I stood in the driveway watching her car disappear down the street, and I felt completely bewildered and confused. I had expected tears of joy and gratitude, and instead I got terror and panic and her running away from me. Nothing about her reaction made any sense. I walked back into the house and sat down at the kitchen table, still holding the ring in my hand. I stared at it, trying to understand what had just happened and why finding her wedding ring had caused her to flee like I had shown her evidence of a crime. I replayed the moment over and over in my head, analyzing every detail of her reaction. The way her face went pale, the way her eyes widened in fear, the way she backed away from the ring like it was dangerous, the way she asked where I found it with a voice full of dread, the way she said it was not possible when I told her I found it where she lost it. None of it made sense if she had actually lost the ring by accident while swimming. I tried calling her cell phone, but she did not answer. I called 5 times in a row, and each time it went straight to voicemail. I sent her text messages asking where she was and begging her to come home so we could talk. I said I did not understand what was wrong, and I needed her to explain why she ran away. She did not respond to any of my messages. I sat at the kitchen table for hours, waiting for her to come home, or at least call me back, but there was nothing. As the hours passed and the sun went down, I started to feel a creeping sense of dread in my stomach. Her reaction was not the reaction of someone who was surprised and happy. It was the reaction of someone who was caught or exposed. It was the reaction of someone who saw something they thought was buried forever, suddenly appearing in front of them. I started to think terrible thoughts that I tried to push away, but they kept coming back stronger each time. I thought about how she had been distant during that trip 3 years ago. I thought about how she had insisted on swimming alone that morning even though the water was cold. I thought about how she had been so specific about where she lost the ring near the old dock. I thought about how devastated she had been for months afterward, but also how she had refused to ever talk about it in detail. I thought about how she had refused to get a replacement ring, saying nothing could replace the original. At the time, I had interpreted all of those things as signs of how much she loved me and how much the ring meant to her. But now, sitting alone in the dark, holding the ring and replaying her terrified reaction, I started to wonder if there was another explanation. What if she had not lost the ring by accident? What if she had thrown it in the lake deliberately? And if she had thrown it away on purpose, then the question was why? Why would someone throw away their wedding ring and then lie about losing it? The only reason I could think of was that she had done something she was ashamed of. Something so terrible that she could not bear to wear the ring anymore. Something that made her want to get rid of the symbol of our marriage. But what could be so bad that she would throw away the ring she cherished more than anything? The answer that kept forming in my mind was one I did not want to believe but could not ignore. Infidelity, betrayal, an affair. I sat there in the dark, holding the ring and feeling sick to my stomach as the pieces started to fit together in a pattern I had been too blind to see. That weekend at the lake 3 years ago, when she lost the ring, her distance and discomfort, her insistence on swimming alone, her devastation afterward that seemed more like guilt than grief, and now her terror when I showed her the ring because it was proof that her story had been a lie. The ring had not slipped off her finger by accident. She had thrown it away to hide what she had done. She did not come home that night, and I sat awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a message or a call, but there was nothing. I did not know where she was, or who she was with, or if she was safe. Part of me was worried about her, and part of me was angry that she had run away without explanation. But the biggest part of me was terrified of what the truth might be when she finally decided to tell it. I knew something terrible was coming, and that our lives were about to change in ways I could not take back. I tried to think of innocent explanations for her reaction, but none of them made sense. Maybe she was in shock from seeing the ring after thinking it was lost forever. But shock does not make someone run away and refuse to answer calls. Maybe she was upset because finding the ring reminded her of the pain of losing it. But that would make her happy, not terrified. Maybe she was having some kind of mental breakdown. But her reaction had been too specific, too focused on the ring itself and where I had found it. I called her friends and her sister asking if they had seen her or heard from her. They all said no and asked what was wrong. I did not know what to tell them because I did not understand what was happening myself. I just said we had a misunderstanding and I was trying to reach her. They promised to call me if they heard from her. I spent the entire night pacing through the house holding the ring and replaying every moment of our marriage looking for signs I had missed. The next morning, her sister called me back, and her voice was heavy and sad in a way that made my stomach drop. She said my wife had called her late last night and had told her everything. She said my wife was staying at a hotel and needed some time to figure out how to talk to me. I asked what she meant by everything, and her sister was quiet for a long moment. Then she said in a voice full of pity that my wife needed to be the one to tell me, but that I should prepare myself because it was going to be very hard to hear. I begged her to tell me what was going on and to stop being cryptic. I said I had a right to know why my wife ran away when I showed her the wedding ring I had found. Her sister sighed deeply and said she was not supposed to say anything, but she thought I deserved to know before my wife came home. She said my wife had not lost the ring swimming. She said my wife had thrown the ring in the lake deliberately, and she had thrown it in the lake because of what had happened that weekend 3 years ago. My hands started shaking, and I could barely hold the phone. I asked what happened that weekend, and my voice came out as a whisper. Her sister said my wife had not been at the lake the entire time. She said my wife had left the cabin on Saturday and driven to a hotel 30 miles away. She said my wife had met someone there, a man from her work. She said they had spent Saturday afternoon and evening together at that hotel. She said my wife had been having an affair for months before that trip, and that weekend was supposed to be the end of it. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach, and I could not breathe. Her sister kept talking, but I could barely hear the words over the ringing in my ears. She said my wife had felt so guilty about what she had done that she could not stand to wear her wedding ring anymore. She said my wife threw the ring in the lake on Sunday morning before we left as a way of punishing herself and getting rid of the evidence. She said my wife had been planning to confess everything to me, but then when the ring was gone, she realized I would ask how she lost it, and the lie just came out. Her sister said my wife had lived with that secret for 3 years. She said my wife had ended the affair and never spoke to the man again. She said my wife had been trying to be a better wife and make up for what she had done. But the secret had eaten away at her every day, and now that I had found the ring, the truth could not stay buried anymore. My wife finally came home 2 days later, and she looked like she had not slept the entire time she was gone. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and her face was pale and hollow. She walked into the house slowly, like she was going to her own execution. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the ring in front of me, and I had been staring at it for hours. When she saw me sitting there, she stopped in the doorway and fresh tears started running down her face. She said she was sorry over and over, but I did not respond because I was not ready to hear apologies for something I did not fully understand yet. She sat down across from me at the table and stared at the ring between us. She said she knew her sister had told me some of it, but that she needed to tell me everything herself. She said she owed me the full truth, even though it was going to destroy me and destroy us. Her voice was shaking, and she could barely get the words out. I told her to start talking and tell me exactly what happened 3 years ago at the lake. She took a deep breath and started from the beginning. She said she had been having an affair with a man from her office for about 6 months before that anniversary trip. She said it started innocently with conversations at work, and then coffee meetings, and then it escalated into something physical. She said she knew it was wrong and she hated herself for doing it, but she could not seem to stop. She said the man made her feel young and exciting and alive in ways she had not felt in years. She said it had nothing to do with me or our marriage, but everything to do with her own selfishness and weakness. She said she had planned to end the affair before our anniversary trip because she could not keep living the lie. But the man had convinced her to meet him one more time. So on that Saturday during our trip, she had told me she wanted to go into town to do some shopping. Instead, she drove 30 miles to a hotel where he was waiting for her. She said they spent the afternoon and evening together, and she knew while it was happening that it would be the last time. She said she told him it was over and that she was choosing her marriage and her family over him. She came back to the cabin late that night after I had already gone to sleep. She said she lay awake next to me feeling disgusted with herself and terrified that I would somehow sense what she had done. The next morning she could not stand to wear her wedding ring anymore because it felt like a lie on her finger. She said every time she looked at it she felt sick with guilt. So she went swimming that morning, and while she was in the water, she pulled the ring off her finger and threw it as far as she could toward the old dock. She wanted it gone so she would not have to see it and be reminded of her betrayal. When she came back to shore, she realized she would have to explain where the ring was. She panicked, and the lie came out automatically. She said the ring slipped off while she was swimming. She said she believed at the time that the ring would never be found and that the secret would stay buried at the bottom of that lake forever. She said she had tried to confess to me multiple times over the years, but she could never find the courage. She convinced herself that telling me would only hurt me and destroy our family for something that was already over. She said when I walked through the door last week holding that ring, she knew immediately that everything was about to fall apart. She said seeing the ring was like seeing a ghost of her betrayal coming back to haunt her. She said she ran because she was terrified and ashamed and did not know how to face me. She said she had spent 2 days trying to find the words to tell me the truth, and now here it was, laid out between us, and there was no taking it back. She told me the affair had lasted 6 months total and had ended that weekend at the lake 3 years ago. She said she had cut off all contact with the man immediately after that final meeting at the hotel. She said he had tried to reach out to her several times in the weeks after, but she blocked his calls and emails and refused to engage with him. She said he eventually gave up and stopped trying. She said she had not seen him or spoken to him since that day, and she had changed jobs within her company to make sure they would never have to work together again. She said ending the affair had been the easy part. The hard part had been living with the guilt every single day for 3 years. She said the guilt had consumed her and changed her and made her hate herself. She said every time I kissed her or told her I loved her or held her hand, she felt like a fraud. She said every anniversary and every holiday and every moment of intimacy we shared was tainted by the knowledge of what she had done. She said the ring sitting at the bottom of the lake had become a symbol of her betrayal, and she had tried to convince herself it would stay buried forever. She said she had tried to be a better wife after ending the affair. She said she had thrown herself into our marriage and tried to make up for what she had done by being more attentive and more loving and more present. She said she had hoped that if she was good enough for long enough, maybe she could somehow balance out the wrong she had committed. But the guilt never went away, and the secret never stopped eating at her. She said there were nights when she lay awake next to me wanting desperately to confess, but she was too afraid of losing me and destroying our family. She said when she threw the ring in the lake, it had been an act of desperation and self-punishment. She said she could not stand to wear the symbol of our vows on her finger when she had just broken those vows in the worst possible way. She said throwing it away felt like the only way to physically remove the weight of what she had done. She did not think about the fact that I would ask how she lost it or that she would have to lie to cover up the truth. The lie just came out in the moment, and then she was trapped in it. She said she never imagined anyone would find the ring after 3 years. She said professional divers had searched and found nothing, so she convinced herself it was truly gone forever. She said the lake had become a kind of grave for her secret, and she had made peace with the fact that the truth would die with that ring at the bottom of the water. She said she had even started to believe her own lie that she had lost it accidentally while swimming. It was easier to live with that story than to remember the truth. When I walked through the door holding the ring, she said time stopped and her entire world collapsed. She said seeing that ring again was like seeing proof of her crime being presented in court. She said she knew in that instant that everything she had buried was about to come to the surface, and there was no way to stop it. She said she ran because she could not face me in that moment, and because she needed time to figure out how to tell me the truth without completely destroying me. She said the man she had the affair with meant nothing to her now, and had meant very little even at the time. She said it was not about him, it was about her own brokenness and her own selfish choices. She said she loved me and had always loved me, and the affair had been the biggest mistake of her life. She said she had spent 3 years trying to live with that mistake and be worthy of me again, but now that I knew the truth, she understood our marriage might be over. She said she would accept whatever I decided, and she would not fight me if I wanted a divorce, because she knew she deserved to lose me after what she had done. I sat there listening to her confession and feeling like I was watching our entire marriage burn down around me. Every word she spoke was destroying a memory or tainting a moment I had held as sacred. I thought about the 3 years since she threw away that ring and how I had believed we were happy and growing closer. I thought about all the times she had smiled at me and told me she loved me while carrying this massive secret. I thought about how I had comforted her when she was sad or stressed, never knowing that her sadness was guilt over betraying me. I picked up the ring from the table and held it in my hand, looking at it closely. This small piece of metal that was supposed to represent forever had instead become the evidence that forever was a lie. I looked at her across the table and said, "You did not lose this ring." She shook her head and whispered, "No, I threw it away." I said, "You threw away our vows, and then you looked me in the eyes and lied to me for 3 years while I mourned the loss of something you deliberately destroyed." She nodded and covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I asked her if she understood what she had done, not just by having the affair, but by lying about it for so long. I said if she had confessed 3 years ago when it happened, we might have had a chance to work through it. We could have gone to counseling and rebuilt trust and maybe salvaged our marriage. But instead, she chose to lie and let me believe a false story and build our life on top of a foundation of deception. She said she knew and that she had made everything worse by hiding it, but she had been too afraid and too selfish to face the consequences. I asked her what she expected me to do with this information now. I asked her if she thought I could just forgive her and move on like nothing happened. I asked her how I was supposed to trust anything she said ever again when she had proven she could look me in the eyes and lie convincingly for years. She said she did not expect me to forgive her, and she understood if I could never trust her again. She said she just wanted me to know the truth because living with the lie had become unbearable, and I deserved to know what really happened. I told her the worst part was not even the affair itself, but the fact that she had let me suffer thinking I had somehow failed her. I said when she lost the ring, I blamed myself for not being able to find it. I spent money hiring divers and spent hours searching the lake bottom feeling like I had let her down. I watched her grieve for months and held her while she cried about losing the symbol of our love, never knowing she had thrown it away deliberately because our love had already been broken by her choices. She said she had never meant for me to blame myself, and seeing me search so desperately for the ring had made her guilt even worse. She said she had wanted to stop me and tell me the truth so many times, but she was trapped in the lie and did not know how to get out. She said every time I tried to comfort her about the ring, she felt like the worst person alive because I was being kind to her about something that was entirely her fault. I set the ring on the table between us and slid it toward her. I said this ring does not represent our marriage anymore. It represents your betrayal and your lies and 3 years of deception. I said I could not look at it without feeling sick, and I did not want it in my house. She asked what I was going to do, and whether our marriage was over. I said I did not know yet, because I needed time to process everything and figure out if I could ever look at her the same way again. I told her I was going to stay at a hotel for a few days, because I could not be in the same house with her right now. She begged me not to leave and said we needed to talk more and work through this together. But I said there was nothing left to talk about because she had already said everything. The ring had told me the truth, and now I had to decide what to do with that truth. I stayed away from the house for a week, trying to process everything and decide what I wanted to do. I thought about our entire marriage and tried to figure out what was real and what had been a lie. I thought about whether I could ever forgive her or trust her again. I thought about whether staying together was worth the pain or whether leaving would be better for both of us. Every option felt wrong, and every path forward felt impossible. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the marriage I thought I had no longer existed, and maybe it never had. I decided I could not stay married to someone who had betrayed me and then lied about it for 3 years. The affair itself was devastating, but the years of deception afterward were what I could not forgive. She had watched me suffer and blame myself and searched desperately for a ring she had thrown away. She had let me believe a false story about our marriage while she carried the truth alone. She had made the choice every single day for 3 years to keep lying to me, and that choice told me everything I needed to know about who she was. I went back to the lake one final time before filing for divorce. I brought the ring with me, and I stood on the dock where I had proposed to her all those years ago. I thought about the young man I had been, and the future I had imagined when I put that ring on her finger. I thought about all the promises we had made to each other, and how those promises had been broken not by time or circumstance, but by deliberate choices and calculated lies. I threw the ring back into the lake as hard as I could and watched it disappear into the dark water. I wanted it to go back to the place where my wife had tried to bury her betrayal. I wanted it to sink to the bottom where it belonged, because it no longer represented love or commitment or anything worth keeping. The ring was evidence of a marriage that had drowned 3 years ago, even though I had not known it at the time. Returning it to the lake felt like finally accepting that truth and letting go of something that was already dead. I filed for divorce the following week, and my wife did not contest it. She signed every paper without argument and moved out of our house within a month. She sent me letters apologizing and begging for another chance, but I never responded because there was nothing left to say. She had made her choices, and now we both had to live with the consequences. Some of our friends took her side and said I was being too harsh and that everyone makes mistakes. But they did not understand that it was not just the affair that ended our marriage, it was the 3 years of lies that came after. I sold the cabin we used to rent at the lake, and I never went back to that place again. It held too many memories, both good and bad, and I did not want to be reminded of either. The lake had given back the ring, and in doing so, it had revealed a truth that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. My wife had thrown away our vows that weekend 3 years ago, but I did not know it until the ring came back to show me what she had done. I dove to the bottom of a lake to find my wife's wedding ring, thinking it would bring us joy and closure. When I brought it home, she ran because the ring was proof that the marriage she threw away 3 years ago was never lost by accident. It was abandoned deliberately and hidden under layers of lies. The lake kept her secret until I disturbed it and brought the truth back to the surface. Some things are better left buried, but sometimes the truth finds a way to rise, no matter how deep you try to bury it. That ring destroyed my marriage twice, once when she threw it away, and again when I found it, and she could no longer hide from what she had done.